Greetings everyone. If you haven't yet, hit subscribe to the Ruslan Belov channel so you don't miss the daily briefings. Today we're covering the situation as of August 21st, 2026. A huge number of important developments took place today, so let's get right into it. We'll start with information from the Ukrainian side, indicating that around 25,000 North Korean soldiers are now on Russian territory, along with a separate group of roughly 400 FPV drone operators. They are reportedly set to replace Russian troops currently holding defensive positions in the Kursk and Belgorod regions. Russian command is trying to stretch Ukrainian positions as thin as possible, and the North Korean contingent may play a positive role in that effort for the Russian side. There's also word that a small group of Brazilian mercenaries was eliminated at the front in recent days. Photos, names, and other details have circulated, so it appears that alongside Colombians already known to be fighting on Ukraine's side, there are now a notable number of Brazilians as well. Both sides are drawing on every available means to build up manpower and reserves, since this provides a real advantage in personnel. Infantry still plays a major, I'd even say enormous, role in this war. No matter how important technology and other factors are, without infantry the trenches simply stay empty and there's physically no one left to hold the defense. Now let's turn to the front line, where some genuinely notable events are unfolding. From the Zaporizhzhia sector, today brings news that the settlement of Zelin has come under Russian control. Despite substantial reserves that Ukraine has pulled into this direction, the Vostok grouping of forces Vostok is advancing steadily, and the Ukrainian side has so far been unable to stop it. Not long ago, it looked as though the Ukrainian army had essentially halted the Vostok grouping, but it has since built up strength and resumed offensive operations. And we're now seeing what amounts to a new settlement taken almost every day. To reinforce the Zaporizhzhia direction, AFU Armed Forces of Ukraine is pulling in troops from across the front, including from the northeastern Kharkiv sector and the Sloviansk sector, and the front in those areas has immediately begun to buckle under Russian pressure. In the northern part of the Zaporizhzhia direction, Russian forces are clearing territory between the Haishur and Verkhnya Tersa rivers. A handful of settlements remain to be taken there, which would create a large staging area for a further push toward the eastern outskirts of Zaporizhzhia. If Russian forces advance along Highway H15, there aren't many major settlements left before reaching the city of Zaporizhzhia itself, though the immediate objective right now is clearing the territory between the two rivers. As the map shows, the area up to the Verkhnya Tersa river isn't particularly fortified, and the distance between settlements is fairly large. Russian forces are quite skilled at moving through tree lines in summer. It's actually easier to advance that way in the warmer months. The Ukrainian side has limited infantry, so clearing these tree lines can proceed fairly quickly, and they also serve as an initial logistics route for supplying the front line. Wherever drone operator positions are spotted along them, they get hit with glide bombs. Looking ahead, I think there's a very good chance that by the end of autumn, Russian forces will reach the Verkhnya Tersa river along this entire stretch of the front. From that river area to Zaporizhzhia itself is roughly 40 kilometers, not a huge distance. Russian forces are already striking targets across Zaporizhzhia region with FPV drones to a depth of up to 60 kilometers, so it's not hard to guess what comes next. Once that river line is crossed, pressure on the city and its surroundings will increase substantially. And if you zoom out and look at the broader Zaporizhzhia region, not much of it will remain under Ukrainian control. In Orikhiv, fighting continues inside the settlement itself, with Russian infantry continuing to advance within the town. Objective control footage from the settlement remains limited since, as I've mentioned before, that doesn't currently benefit either side. Both sides are keeping their cards close for now, and neither will show them before there's something concrete to reveal. Let's move to another sector that also has very good news for the Russian side today. It isn't reflected on the map yet, but based on information from sources on the ground, this concerns Kupiansk. The Russian side has significantly improved its position in the city, and it can now be said that nearly the entire town is under Russian army control. From the Yoveliny microdistrict comes word that Russian forces have taken it under full control. On the map, it's currently marked as a gray zone, but it will likely turn red soon. This comes from people on the ground and a reliable source. This progress became possible thanks to the buildup of rear area logistics. Kupiansk's persistent problem was always logistics which had never been stable, and that weakness had prevented major gains in the settlement for a long time. The Russian army could arguably have taken it much earlier, but it's really only now, with AFU facing serious infantry shortages, that this has become achievable. In Kupiansk-Vuzlovi, Russian positions are also very strong, with final mop-up operations underway. Once that settlement is cleared, Kovsharivka will be next. Overall, it's fair to say the Kupiansk front is winding down as a distinct battle, and new fighting will most likely begin further north. That's the direction currently of greatest interest to the Russian side. It's quite possible Russian command will freeze this front for now and concentrate its efforts on the Veliki Burluk direction instead. In the pocket south of Kupiansk-Vuzlovi, AFU is effectively trapped since there's no way to resupply troops there by land. All supplies now come via agricultural drones capable of carrying around 20-30 kilograms, which is hard to call proper resupply. This whole saga is likely nearing its end soon. Wounded AFU soldiers there essentially have nowhere to go since there are no bridges in the area. Overall, a serious headache for the Ukrainian army. Now let's move to the Sloviansk direction, where important news is also coming in. Near the settlement of Nikonorivka, the Ukrainian mapping resource Deep State has published an updated map showing a gray zone there. It appears Russian forces are attempting to seize the strongpoints surrounding the settlement from all sides. Ukrainian logistics in the area of Mykolaiivka, as well as around Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, continue to come under heavy strikes from FPV drones and glide bombs. Next, let's move to the Dobropilya direction, where some of the fiercest fighting is currently taking place. Today, it was expected that Russia's Ministry of Defense would announce the completion of combat operations for the settlement of Dobropilya. That didn't happen today, and it's likely this announcement will come tomorrow or the day after. However, several reliable pro-Russian sources noted today that Russian forces have significantly improved their positions in this direction, and various analysts are adjusting their assessments accordingly. According to incoming reports, Russian forces have managed to gain a foothold in Dobropilya itself, while the Ukrainian side is attempting to organize defenses further back near Novohayarivka, Nadievka, and Novofedorivka. Encirclement of Dobropilya from the south is effectively complete. From this small settlement, Russian forces may soon begin pushing toward the southwestern part of what's being called the Dobropilya citadel. In effect, the battle for the Dobropilya citadel appears to be entering its final stage. Russian forces have placed the settlement in a partial encirclement and continue to press the offensive from the south, east, and north simultaneously. For several days running now, we've been seeing footage of strikes along the T-0515 highway near the settlement of Pokrovsk. Today, Russian sources released footage showing 11 pieces of AFU equipment destroyed there. The road is covered with anti-drone netting, but that hasn't helped the Ukrainian side much. The road continues to suffer systematic damage, and it's clearly become one of the biggest pain points for the Ukrainian army in this direction. Resupplying infantry and evacuating the wounded has become a major problem there. Meanwhile, there's one interesting detail from Pokrovsk worth mentioning, drawn from Ukrainian reporting. Sources describe Pokrovsk as now so far behind the front line that Russian servicemen reportedly move around the town without much concern. That's a striking contrast to the situation not long ago when the drone threat there was severe. Even in winter, people had to shelter in multi-story buildings and move in short dashes. Now, by comparison, Pokrovsk is described as a deep rear area. Sense that Ukrainian drone operators aren't even particularly focused on applying pressure there anymore, relatively speaking, of course. But from these accounts, something resembling ordinary civilian life appears to be returning to parts of Pokrovsk, which contrasts sharply with the deep state map where Pokrovsk shows the front line having only just pulled back, with fighting still marked as occurring practically inside the town itself. That contrast indirectly points to a fairly deep Russian advance around Pokrovsk on multiple sides. What remains is for Russian forces to take the settlement of Zaporizhzhia, which would further ease pressure on the city. That small town reportedly still hosts a significant number of Ukrainian FPV operators. It's somewhat notable that Russian forces haven't moved into it yet, but this likely just isn't the current priority. There's a chance it could become one next year. If it's taken, the front there could realistically shift all the way to Andriivka, more than 25 kilometers from the western outskirts of the city. Once the distance from Pokrovsk to the actual line of contact reaches something like 70 kilometers, that's when something resembling normal life could realistically start returning there. At that point, reconstruction work in the city could begin in earnest, and I think by 2027, as much as circumstances allow, ordinary life will return there. Occasional strikes will still occur, but FPV drones certainly won't be able to reach that far. NATO conducts large-scale air maneuvers near the Kaliningrad region border. On August 18th, roughly 25 Alliance aircraft flew over northeastern Poland in exercises that involved American and Norwegian fighter jets, Apache attack helicopters, an E-3A AWACS early warning plane, a Bombardier Artemis II reconnaissance aircraft, and an EA-37B Compass Call electronic warfare plane. Analysts paid particular attention to the fact that reconnaissance aircraft and the EA-37B were operating simultaneously near Kaliningrad, a combination that typically points to active signals intelligence collection against Russian air defense and radar systems in the exclave. NATO described the drills as US-led and framed them as aimed at practicing coordination and reinforcing deterrence. The flights continued in the days that followed. This comes on the heels of some genuinely striking reporting out of German outlet Bild, which says it has obtained details of a NATO contingency plan known as the Land Warfighting Concept, reportedly developed under a US Army officer. According to that reporting, the plan lays out a three-stage response in the event Russia were to strike the Baltic states. First, suppressing Russian missile and drone threats using aircraft, missiles, and unmanned systems, with Kaliningrad singled out as a priority target given its concentration of air defense systems. Second, setting up an autonomous zone along the Russian and Belarusian borders, where drones and ground robots, rather than NATO personnel directly, would engage advancing forces. And third, striking targets inside Russia itself, including airfields, defense plants, bridges, and rail lines, reportedly even factoring in cooperation with domestic opponents of the Russian government. Separately, a senior US Army Europe general has publicly stated in recent months that the alliance now has the capability to take down Kaliningrad on a timeline he called unprecedented. Remarks that drew sharp warnings from Moscow, including a statement that any attack on Kaliningrad would be treated as an attack on Russia itself, with all retaliatory measures available under Russian nuclear doctrine. Now, all of that raises a fairly obvious question. How realistic is any of this really? Even setting aside the question of whether NATO could ever actually get political consensus to assemble a force for something like this, which I'm honestly skeptical of, actually going in and holding a city like Kaliningrad would be a completely different problem from suppressing air defenses from a distance. Urban terrain, a hostile population, and everything modern conflicts have taught us about how technology has changed warfighting all point the same direction. This would not be a walk-in operation. And there's the far bigger issue hanging over the whole scenario. Russia has openly signaled that an attack on Kaliningrad would fall under its nuclear doctrine, meaning any move in that direction risks a level of escalation that would be catastrophic not just for NATO, but for the security of the entire European continent.